Welcome to the Marriage Puzzle Podcast with Julie and Thomas Hobby. We are marriage coaches who help couples with pain points about money, intimacy, and communication go from being overwhelmed to being secure in their marriage.
If this is your first time listening to us, thanks for checking out our podcast. And don't forget to subscribe and leave us a rating and a review. Let's dive into this episode.
Thanks for joining us on another podcast episode. We're super excited to have our friends Eric and Kate join us this week from Evolved Marriage. So welcome, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here.
We are.
Yeah, and let's just start with you telling us a little bit about yourselves, your story, how long you've been married, your family. Let our listeners know about you guys.
Sure. I'll he's pointing at me.
Yeah.
You can fill in the blanks. But yeah, so we're Kate and Eric. We are we've been married for 9 years tomorrow. Actually, tomorrow's our 9th anniversary.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. But we've actually been together for, I want to say 18 years.
Nice.
We finish each other's sentences. We have 2 kids, a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. And yeah, we have a marriage podcast. We kind of had a rough start to our relationship. Actually, the start of a relationship was amazing. You look at the start of any relationship. And then the more the relationship went on, the more problems started coming up. We started dealing with major issues and, almost called it quits. And then we decided against that idea. We decided that divorce was not an option for us and that we were going to put all of our hearts and souls into this, but do it in a way that's joyful and fun. And so that's really what our podcast is about. It's about growing your relationship and your intimacy in a fun way. So that's really that's what we're about.
Yeah, and I think probably a lot of the issues came up when we had kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think, certainly we thought, we knew what it was going to be like to have kids, and we had kids, and a lot of the issues came up, and I naturally started to gravitate towards work where I felt really confident and knew I could win and knew I could achieve in the restaurant industry. And I think Kate felt like she was really taking care of home life while also being a full-time teacher. And there was just a massive amount of disconnection. And so a lot of unhealthy habits came up. And like Kate said, as we were calling it quits, we really came to the realization that, hey, these were a lot of internal problems that we each had individually. And it's probably best that we continue to work on them together as a team and figure it out, other than jump into another relationship, have a great honeymoon phase for a couple of years, and then be faced with these problems.
The exact same problems, because you can't run away from things that are, from your family of origin and all those problems.
We essentially talk about all the screw ups that we had in our life, and we try to help other couples not.
I mean, if you want to sound like an amazing couple, listen to our past, and we got you beat.
Yeah.
That's great. So, yeah, I mean, I think that what you're saying there makes a lot of sense, and the fact that you're able to just tell your story and stories and just be able to help other people. Just from that aspect, I mean, it's something that we don't often talk about a lot, is just our personal individual stories. I mean, whenever you meet another couple, you always talk about, how long have you been married? How many kids do you have? Like the surface level top stuff. And you never get really down into the deep parts of your relationship. And by sharing that depth, which is, what you guys are doing, what we're trying to do, and what so many others in this marriage community are doing, it really can help to make someone feel not alone in their situation.
Absolutely. And I find that's kind of where we were at, is we were going through this, and, you kind of talk to your friends and family about it, but they don't necessarily understand how hard it is and the depth of it. And a lot of them were even telling us, like, let it go. Like, let it go. This, you've fought long enough. Like, let it go. It's not worth it anymore. And so had we followed their advice, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be together. Our kids wouldn't have parents living under the same roof. Like, we would have missed out on the growth we've experienced in these last few years. And the amazing relationship we're in now, like had we listened to them. So I think, yeah, it's really easy to look at people's relationships on Instagram reels and like kind of like the Instagram reel of life, and talk to people in your staff rooms and everywhere else and see like, man, I wish I had a nice relationship like that. But it's not very often you meet couples who are ready to be open and honest and vulnerable about their past and their struggles. And that's when you really start looking at people and being like, wow, I'm not alone. And I feel like I can talk about this too.
Yeah, and a big part of what we were realizing, just kind of add to what you're saying, and I think you guys kind of touched on it, is we were seeing a lot of surface conversations, but nobody was really diving into these deep, challenging topics. Sometimes we would talk about something and invite it, and it would just kind of get brushed off, like, oh, that sounds heavy. Oh well, and then you'd move on to kind of like talking about the news or whatever. Yeah. And I think what we realized is we really wanted to start to find people that could openly talk about their issues that they were having in marriage, but also could have healthy marriages. Mm-hmm. Because what we found was we could only find two ends of the spectrum. Either here's the highlight reel, everything's absolutely amazing, and a lot of it was kind of wearing masks, or everything's absolutely broken, everything's screwed up, and my life is over.
And we're doing nothing to make it better.
Right. And we were like, this can't be it. Like, people who have amazing marriages also face problems. Mm-hmm. So how do we enter into these two conversations in a really healthy way? Mm-hmm. And I think as we've started to grow and find more of those couples, couples just like you that openly talk about some of the challenges that we face, but still have amazing marriages, mm-hmm. right? And I think that's a really great way to be open and authentic about reality, which we never found in our lives when we were struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love what you guys have done to, put in the hard work to turn your marriage around. And then, like you said, share your story to help others, to give them hope, but also, on your podcast, I love that you make it fun, but real. Mm-hmm. And you don't shy away from the hard work that you did and you continue to do. So something that I came across, like getting to know you guys, that I love, I wanted to have you on to talk about, is this concept of differentiation in our relationships. So do you want to share a little bit about what that is and how you've applied that to your relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. And we can frame it. So I can talk a little bit about what differentiation is, what it actually means, but then we can actually frame it in the way that it really served to evolve our marriage to where mm-hmm. we're at now. But really, differentiation when it comes to relationships is this idea of holding on to yourself, right? Being a whole individual while also getting as close as you can emotionally, intimately to another human being. And what often happens in relationships is that when you get really close to somebody, you do what's called emotional fusion, which is it's very hard for you to sit in the fire with somebody and hold on to yourself. So the example I use is, when Kate comes home from a hard day of teaching and she's overwhelmed and she walks into the house, very chaotic, very feminine, very overwhelmed. Well, back then when I couldn't hold on to myself, I would just get pulled right into that. And we would call it like jumping into the pool. Mm. So then no matter how great of a day I was having, if Kate wasn't feeling great, I would get pulled into her emotional state, and then we would both be in that pool together. And so one of the things that we started thinking about is not only the evolution of our own marriage, but really how do we help couples hold on to all of themselves mm-hmm. and create an amazing marriage instead of it being one or the other.
Right. Not feel like you have to change the person you are, not feel like you have to become someone else in order to please your husband or your wife. So how can you stay true to yourself, the person you are, deep down inside, without needing to become that person you think your spouse might want you to be?
Yeah. And I think for us, the three levels that we think about, like the evolution of our relationship and what we help couples understand is, the three levels are really independence, codependence, which I think a lot of people talk about codependency and it being an issue, but there's some advantages to having some codependent behaviors, right? It's important that when Kate is having a very emotional experience, I'm just not a cold robot, like totally detached from her experience, unempathetic. So it's important to have some of these, okay, I get what you're feeling. I can have the emotional experience beside you. And so for us, the three levels are, independence, codependence, and interdependence. And so when we first met, I think a lot of couples in the beginning, they're full on independence, right? So they're two beings that are coming together. That's what's so exciting, right? That's what desire is all about, is getting to know another human being. So the two selves coming together to create a relationship. And as we started to grow into our relationship, when you're in that independence mode, oftentimes when you get close to somebody, it feels like everything's a negotiation, right? Like you're losing part of yourself. A huge thing that we see in marriages with women is this idea that, you use me just for our body when it comes to sexuality, right? So it's like, yeah, if you enjoy sex, that means that you're using me for our body. So when we have sex for you, I lose myself. And so that's very independent thinking, right? It's about me. I don't want to lose myself to the relationship. So I need to stand firm and hold on to myself. So a lot of times we think about this idea of independence in terms of being my way or the highway. I plant my flag, right? This is the idea. This is what we're going to go with. And we all have that in us. And that's healthy sometimes, right? It's healthy for Kate to hold on to herself and challenge my way of thinking. It's healthy for me to challenge her way of thinking with my beliefs, but it has to be done in a healthy way. And oftentimes what happens is as we start to get together in a relationship, in our relationship, this happened where we got to the second stage, which we call codependence, right? Or in differentiation terms, they call this emotional fusion. And so this is the whole theme around happy wife, happy life. I got to give my wife everything she wants, or I got to make sure my husband's happy because when he's angry, he screws everything up. And so this is this idea of giving all of yourself in order to make your partner happy, right? So I get my value out of Kate having a happy time. But when Kate's not happy, I don't feel good. And I spent all my time trying to fix or give her something to get her back in that state. Because my value as a human being has to do with Kate's emotional experience. And so that's kind of a complex way of saying that's what we call codependency, right? But what inevitably happens is as I'm pouring into Kate, as Kate's having a hard time and having problems and suffering in her own life, because Kate has her whole own life, that's outside of mine, well, she's experiencing struggles. And in those moments when I'm trying to pour into her as much as I can, well, if she continues to experience struggles and I'm exhausting myself, what happens is I empty myself. And then inevitably, like happened in our marriage, I grew resentful. I started to get angry at Kate's emotional experience. I was straight pissed off for being, hey, how come I'm giving everything you want? Every time you have a problem, I solve it, yet you're still unhappy, right? And so what was happening is in that codependent stage, I was losing myself to the marriage and I was starting to resent our relationship. Okay. And so when we think about the third stage, we call it interdependence, which is a mix of both, right? Which is this idea of how do I hold on to myself and allow Kate to have her own emotional experience without linking it directly to me, without it meaning anything about me. And so oftentimes now we laugh in our marriage, but it's, couples, they don't believe this sometimes, but it's very easy for Kate to say, I'm extremely frustrated with you, and me not to get defensive or react and say, okay, tell me more about that. Like, I'd love to hear why you're frustrated. What's going on? How am I impacting your experience of the marriage? But it wasn't always like that. Right? Before I used to be like, well, you being frustrated means I did something wrong. So I have to figure out what I did wrong. And if I don't feel like I did anything wrong, then you're the problem and you need to stop being frustrated. Right? And what we found as we started to work with couples is most of the time couples for their whole relationship, this was us for like 10 years, we would bounce from independent to codependent. And then as we'd pour into codependent, it wouldn't work. We'd fly back and slingshot back to independent. So we'd spend these moments and these cycles, you could literally see them in our marriage where I would pour into Kate as much as I could. She would pour into me. And then when we get unhappy and we couldn't sit in that fire anymore, we would totally cut each other off and lone wolf it till we felt totally guilty from being distant. And then we'd try to bid again and pour into each other again. And it was just this back and forth slingshot cycle.
Yeah. And I see it as like you go into a relationship and each of you have a backpack, and your backpack is packed with your own stuff, your own history, your own things you love. So you carry the backpack. And as you grow in the relationship and as life moves forward, your backpack sometimes can get heavy. So, sometimes your spouse will take a little bit out of your backpack and they'll carry a little more of the load. And then sometimes you'll take things and carry a little more of your spouse's load. But what happens is, sometimes when your backpack is too heavy, your spouse will say, oh, just give me your entire backpack. And then they'll carry it for you. And then they get exhausted from carrying it for you. So they're like, I can't carry this for you anymore. Like, you got to take it. And you know what? I'm so tired. Take mine too. And so you go from like, I'm going to carry my own and I'm going to walk up this hill on my own at my own pace with my own stuff to carry my backpack. No, you carry mine. No, you carry mine. Instead of saying like, hey, give me a little bit of your stuff. I'll give you a little bit of my stuff and let's go up this mountain together. So that's kind of like the triangle we're talking about here.
Yeah.
The whole backpack.
If you think about the backpack analogy, right? Because I love that you brought that up, but it's quite dysfunctional. There's two ways that can create dysfunction, right? If Kate feels like, hey, it's your job as a husband to carry my backpack all the time, that belief can be dysfunctional, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because then she's like, oh, you just take on everything. You're my husband. You should solve all my problems. And that's not healthy for Kate's growth. It's not healthy for my growth. And it's actually not healthy for our marriage. Right. But the other side is also unhealthy, where if I was coming to that hike and I was just saying, hey, give me your backpack. You know, you're a woman. You shouldn't carry a backpack all the time. I should solve all your problems. I got all this. Well, that actually is not helping Kate or me or the marriage, right? All it's doing is validating my own ego, thinking, oh, I'm going to take care of my wife and I'm good. But Kate's not really growing. Right. She's not carrying her own stuff. And there was times in our marriage where, you know, when I was in those codependent stages where I was doing everything for Kate, Kate also felt kind of lost. She's like, what is my role here? Like, what do I do?
Mm-hmm.
You literally do everything. And this is not enjoyable. I don't feel like a team. And I think that's really important for us to think. The backpack, this idea of it's really important for Kate to get to a place where she can take on whatever she wants. And I support her sometimes. And same thing for me. So when I'm taking on new challenges, new business ideas, new stuff like that, Kate's like, hey, you got you. Keep at it. If you need support, I trust that you're going to come to me and ask me. But Kate's not going to spend her time constantly checking in.
Can I help? Do you need anything?
Is everything okay?
You
look overwhelmed. She's like, no, you're an adult. I trust that when you're overwhelmed, you're going to come to me because that's the kind of relationship that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I love that. I mean, you know, one of the big themes that I heard throughout that is just the communication theme. Is that, you know, you guys had to develop that communication muscle to stop that whiplash effect of going back and forth from independence to codependence. And once you were able to communicate, you could slow down that whiplash effect and say, okay, now we can kind of live here in the middle, and we can actually talk to each other about this. You know, we've talked about this before, that it's important because your spouse cannot read your mind. I've said that before on another episode.
That was not a Freudian slip.
You change those words too often.
So we've said it before that your spouse cannot read your mind. Yeah. And so that proactive communication is important. And I love how you said it, that, you know, you're an adult and I expect you to be able to come to me and tell me when there's a problem. Now, we all know that there's this human aspect involved in that, right? That's not always how it works. You know,
easier said than done.
You have to kind of fish for it sometimes, which I think is okay in moderation. Sometimes your spouse just needs to feel pursued, feel that you care to inquire about their problem rather than just them coming to you and dumping it on you. And so, but that either way that goes, the communication is key. Whether you have to go and approach them and say, hey, I'm feeling this, can we talk about it? Or you get asked, is something wrong? You have to be willing to open up and communicate from that point of view as well.
Yeah, and I love, Eric, that you gave practical questions on that. You would ask Kate, because I think we can relate to that emotional fusion that you said of carrying that, of totally just ruining each other's moods. And that's something that we can laugh about now, because we used to bring each other down so much, or like you said, or just carry an independent burden without looping the other one in. That now I love our balance of, like, we can pull each other up more than pulling each other down. So we have that good, like, positive the fusion, not the negative emotional fusion. So what are some other practical ways that you guys have implemented to work on this? Like, you know, the pull and shift that you actually went through, you know, that gravitational, the pull of both sides to find that healthy balance.
I think having kind of a daily check-in of just always getting, like, being in the habit of checking in often with your spouse. we'll either, before going to work or after work or something, after our day is kind of done, we make sure that we ask our spouse, open-ended questions. What was the best part of your day? How did how did you feel accomplished today? Things like that. And by asking those questions, without really doing it, you're constantly checking in, and then elaborating on that, oh, I had a really tough day, and letting them know, well, if you need anything, I'm here. And that's it. I'm just dropping that. I'm not going to say specifically what I can do for you or how I can help you, but
I'm not going to try to get you out of your mood.
Yeah, I'm just going to allow you to be cranky from your day at work, and that's okay. You're allowed to feel that way. But if you need anything, let me know. And I think we've created an environment too where we're very comfortable with sometimes suggesting things to the other person. Sometimes I can see that Eric is, frustrated or he's nervous about something, and his mood is definitely off. And I know what's good for him. I know what helps him when he's in those moods because I've asked him before, when you feel stressed, what do you tend to do to get out of those moods? These are conversations we have constantly. And so when he is feeling stressed and when he is feeling anxious, and I know that he's having trouble, kind of regulating his mood, and it's kind of starting to affect the whole household, I'll often tell him, hey, Eric, why don't you go take a walk now? I got this, or you know what, that project you're working on, it can wait 15 minutes for you to go take a walk. Come back. I'll make sure that, the kids are busy and you have time to work on this. So I think creating that environment has also been really helpful for us.
Yeah. And I guess one of the things before I offer some suggestions, because I love what you're saying, one of the things that I think I made the mistake of was when I heard about differentiation and this idea of interdependence, right? I'm totally an achiever. It's kind of obsessive. Kate laughs all the time. She's like, oh, achieving is your coping mechanism. It's unhealthy. But I think it's natural, especially for us men, right? Who are oh, I'm going to crush differentiation. I'm going to go 100%. And when I started reading into it and I, I had a coach help me out being dude, nobody ever gets to the pinnacle. Right? Mm-hmm. There's never a stage where everything's perfectly balanced and aligned. That's just not how life works. And I think being able to let go of that and really kind of sit in the grays sometimes and be hey, so Kate and I have a saying in terms of, our growth, which is called new levels, new devils. And we say this all the time because the reality is Kate and I are always going to experience conflict. There's always going to be discomfort. And as long as we continue to learn to navigate that in a healthy way, we're going to continue to evolve our marriage. And the two biggest things that I help people make decisions, right? I work with a lot of men, but what I help them all the time is, am I making choices from a place of love or from a place of fear, right? And if you can really create awareness around this, the simplest way is, am I trying to avoid a problem or am I trying to create something amazing? And so when you can really start to think about that, we call it the head versus the heart voice. When you're in your head, you're all about scarcity, about survival. When we talk about the heart, it's about love, it's about purpose, it's about future. And so you really have to learn to say, where am I making these choices from? And the other thing too is you need to understand that sometimes in order to grow, you need to challenge your spouse. So what I help other people say, too, in the same context is, are you making this choice to benefit you, to benefit your spouse, or to benefit the relationship? And you want to try to make as many choices as you can to benefit the relationship. So using that example that Kate was saying when she suggested I go for a walk, I love that you said it really nicely because sometimes it does come out very nicely. Hey, I think you should go for a walk. But the reality is sometimes Kate needs to be very firm with me and say, hey, you need to go for a walk right now. And I'm like, oh, I just, and she's like, no, you need to get out of the house.
Leave.
and in that moment, that's very hard for Kate to do. But she's like, this will actually benefit the relationship if I challenge Eric here and allow him to really hold on to himself.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask about was just dive into for a minute was you talked about this head versus heart decision making. And do you feel or have you seen or experienced that from a personality perspective, spouses will typically lean towards one of those as their default? If, I wouldn't even know which one to say mine is right now, but, do you feel like one spouse comes to the table and is always just making decisions from their heart rather than thinking logically or vice versa?
Yeah, I love that. I think as humans, generally, we automatically think with our head, because it is a way to survive, right? We're built to think with our heads first. So it does take training to go from head to heart. I don't think there's a person who would just naturally, automatically think heart unless they've had a lot of practice doing so. So I would say that most spouses most likely make their initial decision, not out loud, but in their head, with their head before they make it with their heart. So I think, like you said, you know, slowing things down and realizing, okay, where is this decision coming from, is the first step in realizing, like, where am I making this decision from? Is it a head decision or a heart decision? So I think that, yes, personality definitely does play into it. I think there's some people who have a more scarce way of seeing the world, probably from their upbringing, you know, especially like, how did your parents see the world? If they always saw like everyone's against you, you fight for your rights, you fight for what you believe in, like nobody's going to help you, you got to do this for yourself. Well, it's definitely going to be hard to train yourself to go from your head to your heart. But if you were from a family of dreamers and who kind of allowed you to, you know, dream and be and see your full potential all the time,
give everyone the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, give everyone the benefit of the doubt. Like, you're more likely going to think with your head but move quicker to your heart. So in order to survive, we're automatically going to think with our head, but it's how quickly you go from here to from your head to your heart, right? So
yeah, and I think a lot of people, when we typically talk about it, right, they use the idea of like animal versus human brain, right? The animal brain is designed to survive. It's important. We all need it. Like, we all need a head voice, right? So this idea of getting rid of the head voice is actually quite dysfunctional. But really what we want to tap into is the human side, the heart side, which is about creating connection and creating love and working as a team.
Yeah, thinking in an abundant way instead of scarce way.
And I think what I frame it as is, sometimes, depending on the situation, you land in your heart a lot more. So what we say all the time is, like, it's natural for Kate and I, when we're in heightened states of conflict, for us both to be in our heads. Mm-hmm. So what we've done, and we have a lot of awareness and training around it, like, hey, when we're in conflict, everything needs to slow down. Mm-hmm. So, like, you know, for me, I'm like a shoot from the hip kind of guy. Things come out very quickly, as opposed to Kate is more of the thinker. She takes everything in. She's like crafting a response. So what we had to realize is, hey, when I'm going very quickly and trying to get an answer out of you, it never leads to anything great. Mm-hmm. So if I can slow down, if I can breathe, and if I can start to continue to think from the heart, hey, I love this woman. I want to create connection here. Yes, this is challenging. Yes, we need to face this, but I have to be kind and I have to navigate this, you know, healthily and correctly. I think that allows us to navigate conflict in a much healthier way. So I really think it is that oftentimes we're very reactionary from our heart, from our head voice, pardon me. And we want to tap into the heart, which is all about possibility, because you love this person that you're often having conflict with, right? I love Kate, but sometimes we're in high times of conflict where I don't see that right away. Mm-hmm. I see her as a threat, and we need to slow everything down so we can tap into our heart voice.
That is so helpful. And thank you for sharing more about that. I think tying in maybe from our personal or individual personalities and then going back to the independence and codependence, would you guys say, like, how do you navigate your own hobbies, like individual interest, or, you know, so you can be like, are you more independent there or codependent, tying all of this in and together? What are some things you do with that?
So for me, I think that it's very important for each person individually to have their own interests and to have their own hobbies and to have their own life, you know, things that they do for themselves. So I think there's a fine balance between doing things for yourself, with yourself, but also inviting your spouse to join you in those things. So oftentimes, you know, what would happen with Eric and I is, I went from, you know, doing yoga all by myself all the time. I would go out, I would go to a studio, I would do things at the yoga studio by myself. And that was kind of my thing. But then when it came to planning dates and things like that, I felt really anxious about planning those things. And so I would say, you know, I don't know how to do this. I'm too nervous to do it. Like, I don't know what to plan. And so with some practice and some time, I realized that I could invite Eric along to the things that I enjoyed. And that was kind of an easy way for me to plan a date, plan something for us to do together. So I think inviting your spouse to the things that you're interested in and inviting them into your kind of independent life is such a great way to combine the two together and to find a good middle between spending so much time with yourself and with your independent self, which is healthy, but also finding that, interdependent middle. Do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I do. And I think oftentimes what happens is when we think about spending time with ourselves, right? Hobbies, connecting to ourselves, I think there's a lot of guilt at first, right? This is certainly what I experienced in my marriage, right? I wouldn't go work out on my own. I wouldn't do things on my own because I was like, well, I can't take time to myself because I have to be connecting with Kate all the time. And I think this is pretty natural, but what we see it as now is it's actually really important for me and for the benefit of my marriage to have a healthy relationship with myself. And I think people neglect that relationship the most often, right? Especially as parents, as lovers, as wives, we're constantly serving others. And I think we forget that, hey, if I'm not connected to myself, if I'm not taking care of myself, finding joy for myself, responsible for my own feelings, it's very hard for me to have a sexual experience with somebody else, have a great conversation with somebody else. And the reality is, I think in a marriage, as threatening as it might be at first, I want Kate to be her own human being. One of the things I say about our marriage is what's most attractive about Kate is that she could literally be with anybody else, but she chooses to be with me, right? She wants to be here with me. So I want her to have her own experience, her own life, and she wants that for me. But sometimes we get in our own way and we're like, no, I should clean the house and I should do the day. I should do all these things. So I'm going to sacrifice my time. Right. And then what you realize is after weeks go by, you've lost connection with yourself. You don't even know who you are anymore. And some people, especially, that happened to us after we had kids, where it had been years since I had connected to myself and I lost who I was. So I think it's really important to cultivate that relationship with yourself in order to be in a healthy relationship with someone else.
Right. Get to know yourself better as an individual so that you can show up for your relationship as an individual. So if I'm constantly just doing things Eric enjoys and I'm doing things that Eric wants, then how can I ever show up as myself in our relationship? So it's so important to continue to get to know myself and have dates with myself in order to be able to show up in a healthy way in my marriage.
That's a good reminder that, your spouse married you for you. So continue to be you and then add value to the relationship together and finding the fun things that you can relate to each other and have fun. Like you guys even talk about bringing fun to the relationship, but not losing yourself because they married you and your personality and all the good things that made you yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this has been really insightful. Thank you guys so much for being here and joining us on our podcast today. We always want to leave space for people to find out where they can find you. So why don't you take a minute and share how any of our listeners can come and check out what you guys are doing?
Yeah, we appreciate that. So everything that we do, you can check us out at evolvemarriage.com. We have a podcast, so the Evolve Marriage Podcast, so you can listen to us pretty much on everything. And we're most active right now on Instagram. So at evolved_marriage is our handle. You can DM us there. You can connect with us there. We're really trying to grow our audience there in order to really connect with people real time so they can see us beyond just the podcast. So that's what we're up to.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of the Marriage Puzzle Podcast. Make sure you go check us out on social media at Marriage Puzzle and check out our website, marriagepuzzle.com, to schedule a free marriage coaching discovery call with us. As always, we look forward to having you join us next week where together we'll work on marriage one puzzle piece at a time. Have a great week.